Photosynthesis is the process of creating sugar and oxygen from carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight. It happens through a long series of chemical reactions, but it can be summarized like this. Carbon dioxide, water, and light go in. Glucose, water, and oxygen come out. Glucose is a simple sugar. Photosynthesis can be split into two processes. The photo part refers to the reaction triggered by light. Synthesis, the making of the sugar, is a separate process called the Calvin cycle. The processes happened inside a chloroplast. This is a specialized structure or organelle in a plant cell. The structure contains stacks of membrane called thylakoid membranes. That's where the light reaction begins.
When light hits a plant's leaves, it shines on chloroplasts and into their thylakoid membranes. Those membranes are filled with chlorophyll, a green pigment.
Light travels as electromagnetic waves. The wavelength distance between waves determine energy level. Some of those wavelengths are visible to us as the colors we see. If a molecule such as chlorophyll has the right shape, it can absorb the energy from the wavelengths of light.
Chlorophyll can absorb light we see as red and blue. That's why we see plants as green. Green is the wavelength plants reflect, not the color they absorb.
While light travels as a wave, it also can be a particle called photon. Photons have no mass. They do, however, have a small amount of light energy.
When a photon of light from the sun bounces into a leaf, its energy excites a chlorophyll molecule. The photon starts a process that splits a molecule of water. The oxygen atom that splits off from the water instantly bonds with another, creating a molecule of oxygen, or O2. The chemical reaction also produces a molecule called ATP, another molecule called NADPH. Both of these allow a cell to store energy. The ATP and NADPH also will take part in the synthesis part of photosynthesis. Notice that the light reaction makes no sugar. Instead, it supplies energy stored in the ATP and NADPH that gets plugged into the Calvin cycle. This is where sugar is made.
But the light reaction does produce something we use, oxygen. All the oxygen we breathe is the result of these steps in photosynthesis, carried out by plants and algae, which are not plants. The next step takes the energy from the light reaction and applies it to a process called the Calvin cycle. The cycle is named before Melvin Calvin, the man who discovered it.
The Calvin cycle is sometimes also called the dark reaction because none of the steps requires light, but it still happens during day. That's because it needs the energy produced by the light reaction that comes before it. While the light reaction takes place in the thylakoid membranes, the ATP and NADPH it produces ends up in the stroma. This is the space inside the chloroplast, but outside the thylakoid membranes.
The Calvin cycle has 4 major steps. Carbon fixation. Here, the plant brings in CO2 and attaches it to another carbon molecule using rubisco. This is an enzyme or chemical that makes reactions move faster. This step is so important that rubisco is the most common protein in a chloroplast and on Earth. Rubisco attaches the carbon in CO2 to a 5-carbon molecule called ribulose. This creates a 6-carbon molecule which immediately splits into 2 chemicals each with 3 carbons. Reduction. The ATP and NADPH from the light reaction pop in and transform the two 3-carbon molecules into small sugar molecules. The sugar molecules are called G3P. That's short for glyceraldehyde. Carbohydrate formation. Some of that G3P leaves the cycle to be converted into bigger sugars such as glucose. Regeneration. With more ATP from the continuing light reaction, leftover G3P picks up 2 more carbons to become RUBP. This RUBP pairs up with rubisco again. They are now ready to start the Calvin cycle again when the next molecule of CO2 arrives. At the end of photosynthesis, a plant ends up with glucose, oxygen, and water. The glucose molecules goes on to bigger things. It can become part of a long-chain molecule such as cellulose. That's the chemical that made up cell walls. They can even put the glucose into other sugars such as fructose to make a plant's fruit sweet. All of these molecules are carbohydrate chemicals containing carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. The plant uses the bonds in these chemicals to store energy. But we use these chemicals too. Carbohydrates are an important part of the foods we eat, particularly grains, potatoes, fruits, and vegetables. Thanks for listening.
Hope you learned something and we will see you again soon. Bye!